a glimmer of hope that a global food crisis could be averted. That's after Russia and Ukraine both signed a UN-backed deal to resume grain exports from Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Now, top officials from Kyiv and Moscow travelled to Istanbul to give the green light on an agreement that will hopefully see vessels restart export operations. It's worth noting that delegates from both countries signed parallel deals brokered by Turkey and the United Nations. UN Chief Antonio Guterres pledged that his organisation would work to ensure that exports run smoothly, but Kyiv has warned that any provocation by Russia over the deal will be met with a military response. All right, let's get more analysis on this deal now with Peter Dickinson from the Atlantic Council. Peter, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. So we've got a deal, but perhaps not in the traditional sense because we don't have both parties signing one piece of paper. So walk us through how this will work.
Good evening. Pleasure to join you. Yes, it's an unusual deal. It certainly reflects the highly unusual circumstances of the current war between Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine was very clear that they would not sign a bilateral agreement, a direct deal with Russia. So they have signed a deal with the UN. Russia has signed a parallel deal, as your introduction mentioned. Now, essentially, the UN and Turkey working together will be responsible for overseeing the renewal of shipments of agricultural produce, largely grain, from Ukraine's key Black Sea ports, that's Odessa and some other nearby ports, which have been under blockade since the Russian invasion began on February the 24th. Russia has said they will allow this now. They will permit this to continue. They will permit the renewal of these grain shipments. Of course, there are the practicalities of the deal are fraught with problems, potential problems. Implementation will be very challenging. So at this stage, I think it's too early to say that the danger of a food crisis is over, that the famine fears are past. But it certainly looks like a step in the right direction.
As you say, Peter, still very much a glimmer of hope at this stage. But you point to the fact that it's not a bilateral deal in the traditional sense. So, one would think that this points to the fact that for the Ukrainians, there wasn't necessarily full trust here. So have they been given any assurances from the Russians that they won't be attacked from an opened up position?
Well, I think the Ukrainian position is clear that they don't regard that Russian words or statements or signed documents or anything coming from Moscow to be of any worth whatsoever. Of course, Russia has many international commitments and bilateral commitments to Ukraine. It has since invaded Ukraine and is now engaged in what Ukrainians believe to be a war of destruction, a war of annihilation. They are wiping out Ukrainian towns and cities systematically. So the notion that there could be some form of a contractual agreement or deal with Russia is actually considered to be absurd in Ukraine at this point. Now, whether these shipments will be safe or not, only time will tell. But Ukraine was very clear from the outset and has been very clear in the last couple of days as the signing has come closer that this is not a deal with Russia. This is a deal with the United Nations in order to alleviate a global food crisis. And it should not in any way be seen as legitimizing Russia's claims to Ukraine or positions in and around Ukraine.
You point to the fact that this is a deal between Russia and the United Nations. So what can the UN do if Russia violates its side of the bargain?
Well, I think the war rather, since it began 5 months ago now, has really shown that the UN has very limited capability to take any action against Russia, really. I mean, Russia remains a permanent member of the Security Council and is essentially immune to sanction from the EU, from the United Nations side. I think if the deal were to break down, all that we would see would be simply it would be officially abandoned and Russia would receive the blame and the opprobrium from the international community. It would be condemned and Russia would, I think perhaps crucially from Russia's point of view, they would lose a lot of their credit amongst the developing world, which is a key area of Russian foreign policy at the moment. Russia, having essentially burnt its bridges with the Western world, is looking very much to secure a position within the developing world to strengthen its position there. Now, if it's seen to be causing widespread famine, obviously that would be hugely damaging for Russia. So Russia is very eager to deflect blame from any food crises and to point the blame elsewhere to the West and to Ukraine. If it were to unilaterally break this deal that's now being brokered, those efforts would come to nothing.